The stagecoach rattled into Tombstone, Arizona territory on a scorching afternoon in August 1881, and Catherine Morgan pressed her face against the dusty window, watching the sun-bleached buildings materialize through waves of desert heat like a mirage she desperately wished would disappear. Her hands trembled in her lap, hidden beneath the folds of her travel-worn dress, and she fought the urge to tell the driver to turn around, to take her anywhere but here, anywhere but this frontier town, where she would have to face her aunt and uncle and pretend that the girl who had left Kansas City 3 months ago was the same one returning now. She knew the truth would show on her face like a brand, and the weight of what had happened in Denver pressed against her chest until she could barely breathe. The coach lurched to a stop outside the Wells Fargo office, and Catherine gathered her carpet bag with numb fingers. She was 22 years old, and her life felt irrevocably over. The other passengers, a mining company representative and a woman with 2 small children, disembarked quickly, eager to escape the suffocating heat inside the coach. Catherine moved slowly, dreading the moment she would have to step into the harsh Arizona sunlight and begin the charade of normalcy. Her uncle had sent the telegram 3 weeks ago, offering her a place to stay after her father's sudden death from pneumonia. Catherine had accepted gratefully, desperate for anywhere to go after what had happened, after Marcus Thornton had destroyed everything she thought her future would be. The memory of his hands, his promises, his ultimate betrayal made her stomach turn, and she gripped the coach doorframe to steady herself. "Miss, you all right?" The driver, a weathered man with kind eyes, peered down at her from his perch. Catherine forced a smile that felt like broken glass across her face. "Just the heat. Thank you." She stepped down onto the wooden sidewalk, and Tombstone assaulted her senses. The main street stretched before her in a chaos of activity that made Kansas City seem genteel by comparison. Cowboys on horseback kicked up dust as they rode past. Miners in dirt-caked clothes stumbled out of saloons, even though it was barely past noon. Women in bright dresses called out from second-story windows, and Catherine quickly averted her eyes, her cheeks burning. The air smelled of horse manure, tobacco smoke, and something sharply metallic that might have been blood from the butcher shop across the street. "Catherine!" A woman's voice cut through the noise, and Catherine turned to see her Aunt Margaret hurrying toward her, face flushed beneath her bonnet. "Oh, my dear girl, you made it safely. We were so worried with all the Apache troubles on the roads." Catherine allowed herself to be enveloped in her aunt's embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of rosewater that reminded her of easier times, of childhood summers before everything became complicated. "The journey was uneventful, Aunt Margaret. Thank you for allowing me to come." "Nonsense, you are family. After your father passed, where else would you go?" Margaret held her at arm's length, studying her face with eyes that saw too much. "You look tired, dear. Exhausted, actually. The travel must have been terribly difficult." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. "I just need rest. It has been a long few weeks." Her uncle's ranch was 3 miles outside of town, and they made the journey in a buckboard wagon driven by a Mexican ranch hand named Miguel, who tipped his hat respectfully but said little. The landscape was so different from Kansas that Catherine felt as though she had traveled to another planet entirely. Where Kansas offered endless rolling plains and occasional stands of trees, Arizona presented an alien vista of saguaro cacti reaching toward the merciless sky, rocky outcroppings that shimmered in the heat, and mountains in the distance that looked like the jagged teeth of some buried god. The ranch house itself was adobe, low and sprawling, with a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Her uncle met them at the door, Walter Morgan, her father's younger brother, a man who had gone west 20 years ago and made his fortune in cattle and copper. He pulled Catherine into a brief, awkward embrace that spoke of family obligation rather than genuine affection, but she was grateful for even that small gesture of acceptance. "You will stay as long as you need," he said gruffly. "Your room is ready." The room was small but clean, with whitewashed walls and a window that looked out over the desert. Catherine set down her carpet bag and sat on the edge of the narrow bed, finally allowing the tears to come now that she was alone. They streamed down her face silently, and she pressed a hand to her mouth to keep from making noise. The shame was a living thing inside her, coiling in her stomach like a snake. Marcus had promised marriage, had sworn his devotion, had convinced her that giving herself to him was merely acknowledging what would soon be official anyway. Then he had disappeared 2 weeks later, and Catherine had learned from his landlady that Marcus Thornton was not a railroad investor, as he had claimed, but a confidence man with a wife in St. Louis and warrants for his arrest in 3 states. She had been such a fool, so naive and trusting and desperate for love after nursing her ailing father for 2 years while he slowly faded away. Marcus had seemed like salvation, like proof that life could still hold beauty and romance. Instead, he had taken the one thing she could never get back and left her with nothing but shame and the terrifying possibility that there might be consequences beyond the emotional devastation. A knock at the door made her jump. "Catherine, dear?" Aunt Margaret's voice was gentle. "I have brought you some water to wash with. Supper will be in an hour." "Thank you," Catherine called, wiping furiously at her face. "I will be out shortly." That evening, Catherine sat at the dinner table and pushed food around her plate while her aunt and uncle discussed ranch business. They ran 500 head of cattle and had interests in 2 silver mines. The Apache leader Geronimo had recently escaped from the San Carlos reservation, and everyone was on edge about possible raids. Several ranches to the south had been attacked, though Walter insisted they were far enough from the reservation and had good enough relations with the peaceful Apache in the area that they should be safe. "We have a new foreman," Margaret said, passing Catherine a bowl of beans. "Hired him 2 months ago after our previous man decided to try his luck in the silver mines. Silas Garrett. He is originally from Texas, I believe. Very capable, your uncle says." "Best hand with horses I have ever seen," Walter agreed. "And the men respect him, which is not easy to earn with some of the rough characters we have working here. Keeps good order." Catherine nodded politely, barely hearing them. She could not imagine caring about ranch business or foremen or Apache troubles. Her entire world had narrowed to her own shame and fear. What if there was a child? What if her ruin became visible for everyone to see? The thought made her want to vomit. She excused herself immediately after dinner, claiming exhaustion, and retreated to her room. Sleep was impossible. She lay in the dark, listening to unfamiliar sounds, coyotes howling in the distance, the restless movement of horses in the corral, the soft voices of ranch hands settling in for the night in the bunkhouse. This was her life now, this strange exile in the desert, and she had no idea how to endure it. The next morning, Catherine woke before dawn to the sound of men moving about outside. She dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses, a blue calico that was already too warm for the Arizona heat, and made her way to the kitchen. Aunt Margaret was already there, preparing breakfast for the ranch hands. "You did not need to rise so early," Margaret said, but she looked pleased. "But since you are awake, you can help me carry these platters out. The men eat in the cookhouse, but I like to make sure they have a good breakfast to start the day." Catherine helped carry plates of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and fried potatoes to the small building adjacent to the main house. A dozen men were gathered around a long wooden table, and they fell silent when Catherine entered, removing their hats with awkward courtesy. She kept her eyes down, painfully aware of their scrutiny, and hurried back to the kitchen. "They mean no disrespect with the staring," Margaret said quietly. "They just are not accustomed to seeing young ladies out here. Most of them have not been in the company of respectable women in months or years." The word respectable hit Catherine like a physical blow, and she had to turn away to hide her expression. If they knew the truth, they would not be removing their hats. They would look at her the way men had looked at the women calling from the upstairs windows in Tombstone. After breakfast, Margaret gave Catherine a tour of the ranch compound. There was the main house, the cookhouse, the bunkhouse, 2 large barns, several equipment sheds, a chicken coop, and a vegetable garden that Margaret tended personally. The corral held at least 30 horses, beautiful animals that gleamed in the morning sunlight. "Our foreman is working with a new stallion this morning," Margaret said, pointing toward a separate smaller corral behind the barn. "Your uncle paid a small fortune for him, but the creature has a wild temperament. Silas is the only one who has been able to get near him." Catherine followed her aunt around the barn, more to be polite than from any real interest, but what she saw made her stop in her tracks. A man stood in the center of the corral with a magnificent black stallion, and horse and man seemed engaged in a conversation conducted entirely through movement and breath. The man was tall and lean, wearing dusty work clothes and a hat that shaded his face. He moved with a fluid grace that reminded Catherine of dancers she had seen in Kansas City. each gesture deliberate and meaningful. The stallion tossed his head and stamped, nostrils flaring, but the man did not retreat or show fear. He simply waited, hands relaxed at his sides, until the horse took a single hesitant step forward. The man rewarded this by turning slightly away, removing the pressure of direct confrontation. It was like watching a chess match played out in flesh and muscle. "That is Silas," Margaret whispered, though they were too far away for him to hear. "He has a gift with difficult animals. I have never seen anything like it." They watched for several more minutes as the dance continued, until finally the stallion allowed the man to approach and place a hand on his neck. Even from a distance, Catherine could see the tension drain from the horse's body, and she felt an unexpected kindling of something in her own chest, a loosening of the tight knot that had lived there for weeks. "Come, I will introduce you," Margaret said, but before they could approach, one of the ranch hands called for her aunt's attention regarding some household matter. "Go ahead without me, dear. I will join you in a moment." Catherine hesitated. She had no desire to meet strange men, to have to smile and pretend and endure the inevitable questions about her presence. But her aunt was already walking away, and the foreman had noticed their presence. He was leading the stallion toward the gate, and it would be rude to simply turn and flee. She walked slowly to the corral fence, her heart inexplicably racing. As the man drew closer, she could make out more details. He was probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. His face was deeply tanned, with lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. There was a scar along his left cheekbone, not disfiguring, but noticeable. He moved with the same easy grace he had shown with the horse, completely comfortable in his own body in a way Catherine had never felt in hers. "Morning, miss," he said, his voice a low drawl that marked him as a Texan. He touched the brim of his hat politely, but did not remove it, his hands still occupied with the stallion's lead rope. "You must be Mr. Morgan's niece from Kansas. He mentioned you would be arriving." "Catherine Morgan," she said quietly, clasping her hands in front of her. "That's Silas Garrett, ma'am. Pleased to meet you." His eyes were gray, she noticed, like storm clouds, and they regarded her with a directness that was neither aggressive nor inappropriate, but still made her want to look away. She had the unsettling feeling that he saw more than she wanted him to see. "This beast here is called Diablo, though I have been trying to convince him he could go by something less dramatic. He is starting to come around to the idea of humans." Despite herself, Catherine felt a small smile tug at her lips. "He is beautiful." That he is. Just needed someone to take the time to listen to what he was saying instead of trying to force him into submission. Silas ran a hand along the stallion's neck, and the horse leaned into the touch. Most problems between horses and humans come down to folks not paying attention. They want the animal to understand them, but they do not try to understand the animal. There was something in the way he said it, something gentle and philosophical, that made Catherine's throat tighten unexpectedly. "That seems like wisdom that could apply beyond horses." "Yes, ma'am, I reckon it does." He studied her for a moment longer, and Catherine felt her face heating. Then he tipped his hat again. "I had better get Diablo settled before he decides he has had enough civilization for one day. Welcome to the ranch, Miss Morgan. I hope you will find it peaceful here." He led the stallion away, and Catherine stood at the fence watching him go. Her aunt reappeared at her elbow. "Silas is a good man," Margaret said quietly. "Keeps to himself mostly, but always respectful. We have been fortunate to have him." Catherine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She could not explain the strange feeling that had settled over her during that brief conversation, as though something frozen inside her had been exposed to sudden warmth and was beginning, painfully, to thaw. The days fell into a rhythm. Catherine helped her aunt with household tasks, cooking and cleaning and tending the garden. She avoided going into Tombstone when her aunt and uncle made their weekly trip to town, claiming headaches or fatigue. The truth was, she could not bear the thought of being around people, of having to maintain the fiction of normalcy. The ranch felt safer, more isolated, even though the work was harder than anything she had done in Kansas City. She saw Silas Garrett frequently, but exchanged few words with him beyond polite greetings. He was usually working with the horses or riding out with the ranch hands to check on the cattle scattered across thousands of acres of desert range. Once, She saw him breaking up a fight between two of the hands, stepping between them with calm authority and sending them in opposite directions before things could escalate to violence. Another time, she watched from the kitchen window as he patiently showed Miguel's young son how to properly saddle a horse, his manner gentle and encouraging. At night, Catherine lay awake, her mind circling endlessly around her situation. It had been nearly 3 weeks since she arrived in Arizona, which meant it had been almost 3 months since Denver, since Marcus, since everything had fallen apart. She found herself mentally counting days, trying to remember the particulars of her cycles, feeling a rising panic when she realized she could not recall with certainty. The heat made her nauseous in the mornings, but perhaps that was just the heat. Her dresses felt tighter, but perhaps she was simply eating more regular meals than she had in the difficult weeks after her father's death. Every small change in her body felt like potential evidence of her ruin, and the uncertainty was its own form of torture. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Catherine was in the garden at twilight, seeking relief from the heat of the day. The desert cooled quickly once the sun set, and she had discovered that this in-between time, when the sky turned extraordinary shades of orange and purple, was the most bearable part of the day. She was picking tomatoes when she heard footsteps approaching, and looked up to find Silas Garrett walking toward her. "Evening, Miss Morgan," he said. "Your aunt asked me to let you know supper will be ready soon." "Thank you." Catherine straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. She had a basket half full of ripe tomatoes balanced on her hip. "The garden has been very productive. I think Aunt Margaret has some kind of magic touch with plants." "She has been working on it for years," Silas agreed. He leaned against the fence post, clearly in no hurry despite having delivered his message. "It is remarkable what can grow in the desert if you know how to work with the land instead of against it." "Is that what you do with the horses? Work with them instead of against them?" "More or less. Every animal has its own language, its own way of seeing the world. My job is to figure out how to communicate across that divide." He looked at her thoughtfully. "People are not so different, I suppose. Everyone has their own language of hurt and healing. The trick is finding someone who speaks yours." Catherine's hands tightened on the basket handle. "That sounds very difficult, finding such a person." "It is, but worth it when you do." He was quiet for a moment, and Catherine could feel him studying her in the gathering dusk. "Miss Morgan, if you do not mind my saying so, you seem like you are carrying something heavy. I do not mean to pry, but sometimes it helps to set a burden down for a bit, even if you have to pick it up again later. You have been here a month, and I have never seen you smile, not truly." Tears sprang to Catherine's eyes so suddenly she could not hide them. She turned away quickly, mortified. "I am sorry. I do not mean to be unpleasant company. That is not what I meant at all." His voice was gentle, and she heard him move closer, but not too close, respecting her space. "You have been through something. Anyone with eyes can see that. I just wanted you to know that here, on this ranch, you are safe. Whatever you are running from or trying to forget, it does not have to follow you into every moment of every day. You are allowed to breathe." The kindness in his words broke something inside her. She set the basket down carefully before she dropped it, and then her face crumpled and the sobs came, wrenching and ugly and impossible to control. She pressed her hands over her face, trying desperately to stifle the sounds, but they kept coming. She felt Silas's presence beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cooling desert air. "It is all right," he said quietly. "Let it out. No one else can hear. It is just you and me and the desert has heard worse, I promise you." Catherine could not stop. Weeks of held grief and shame poured out of her in great gasping waves. She cried for her father, for her lost innocence, for the future she had imagined that would never come to pass. She cried for the trusting girl she had been, and the broken woman she had become. She cried until she was exhausted, until there was nothing left inside her but a hollow, aching emptiness. When she finally quieted, Silas handed her a handkerchief. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice raw. "I am so sorry. You must think I am completely mad." "I think you are human," he said simply. "And I think you have been holding that in for far too long. Do you want to tell me what happened, or would you prefer I just keep my mouth shut and we go back to the house for supper?" Catherine wiped her face with his handkerchief, which smelled faintly of leather and horses and something clean and masculine. Part of her wanted to run away, to retreat to her room and never face him again. But another part, the part that had just emptied itself of weeks of tears, wanted desperately to tell someone the truth, to stop pretending, to be seen for exactly what she was, and find out if she would survive the exposure. "Can we sit?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. They sat on the edge of the garden plot, on the low stone wall that Margaret had built to contain the vegetables. The stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, more stars than Catherine had ever seen in Kansas, a vast sweep of them that made her feel both insignificant and strangely comforted. "I am not the person my aunt and uncle think I am," she began, the words coming slowly at first, then faster. "I am not a respectable young lady deserving of their kindness and protection. I am ruined, Mr. Garrett, completely and irrevocably ruined." She told him about Marcus Thornton, about the courtship that had seemed so romantic at the time and looked so sordid in retrospect. She told him about believing promises of marriage, about giving herself to a man she thought loved her, about discovering the truth too late. She told him about the fear that consumed her now, the dread that there might be consequences beyond the emotional devastation, though she could not quite bring herself to spell out exactly what she meant by consequences. Through it all, Silas sat quietly, listening without judgment or interruption. When she finally fell silent, emptied of words as well as tears, Catherine stared at her hands in her lap. "So now you know what manner of person I truly am. I would understand if you felt obligated to tell my uncle. He should know he is harboring someone of questionable character under his roof. Miss Morgan, look at me." She raised her eyes reluctantly to meet his. "That man lied to you," Silas said, his voice low and intense. "He manipulated you when you were vulnerable, made promises he had no intention of keeping, and took something precious on false pretenses. That does not make you ruined. That makes you a victim of a charlatan. But I should have known better. I should have been more careful. You should have been able to trust a man who claimed to love you. The failure is his, not yours." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes never leaving her face. "Listen to me, because this is important. You are not defined by what someone else took from you. You are defined by who you choose to be now, tomorrow, and every day after. That man does not get to write your story. You do." "I feel so ashamed," Catherine whispered. "Every moment of every day, I feel it like a stain I can never wash away, and I am terrified that—" She broke off, unable to finish. "That there might be a child," Silas finished gently. She nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I do not know yet, but if there is, what am I going to do? How will I survive the scandal? How will I care for a baby with no husband, no means of support? My aunt and uncle would be so ashamed. Everyone would know what I did." "Then we will figure it out," Silas said simply. "If that is what you are facing, we will find a way through it." Catherine stared at him in confusion. "We? Why would you involve yourself in my problems? You do not even know me. Maybe not, but I know enough. I know you are here on this ranch, far from home, grieving your father and dealing with a betrayal that would break most people. I know you have been getting up every day and helping your aunt and working in the garden and keeping it all together despite carrying this weight. That tells me you are stronger than you think." He paused, then added quietly, "And I know what it feels like to believe you are beyond redemption, to think that mistakes define you forever. Someone gave me a second chance once when I did not deserve it. I suppose I figure I can pass that forward." "What mistakes?" The question slipped out before Catherine could stop it. "I am sorry. That was presumptuous." "No, it is a fair question. I was a different person 5 years ago. Angry, violent, drinking too much. I did things I am not proud of, hurt people who did not deserve it. I ended up in a jail in El Paso, looking at a long sentence or possibly a noose, depending on how the trial went. A judge decided to take a chance on me, gave me a choice between prison and working off my sentence on his brother's ranch. I chose the ranch, and the man who ran it, old Bill Dawson, he taught me that who you were yesterday does not have to be who you are today. Changed my whole life." Catherine absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the gentle, patient man sitting beside her. "You seem nothing like the person you are describing." "Because I made different choices. Every day, I choose to be better than I was. That is all any of us can do." He stood, brushing dust from his pants, and offered her his hand. "Come on. Your aunt will wonder where we are. and supper is getting cold. Nothing that happened in Denver has to matter here, unless you decide it does. As far as I am concerned, Catherine Morgan arrived in Arizona in August of 1881, and what happened before that is her business alone. She took his hand and let him help her to her feet. His grip was warm and calloused and steady, and for the first time in months, Catherine felt like she could breathe fully. "Thank you," she said, "for listening, for not judging, for being kind when you had no reason to be. Everyone deserves kindness, Miss Morgan, especially people who think they do not." He smiled at her, a real smile that softened his weathered face and made him look younger. "And maybe you could call me Silas. Mr. Garrett makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and attending church, neither of which happens with any regularity. Then you should call me Catherine." They walked back to the house together, and Catherine felt lighter than she had in weeks. Not healed, not whole, but less broken. As though someone had reached into the darkness she had been drowning in and pulled her partway toward the surface where she could glimpse light. In the weeks that followed, Catherine found herself seeking out Silas's company. Not in any way that would cause comment, but she developed a habit of being near the corrals when he was working with the horses, or walking by the barn when he was tending to equipment repairs. They talked about simple things at first: the weather, the ranch, the peculiarities of desert living. Gradually, as trust built between them, the conversations deepened. Silas told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his mother to cholera when he was 12, about his father, a harsh man who believed affection made boys weak and expressed love through criticism and discipline. He talked about the years of drifting from ranch to ranch, from town to town, never settling anywhere, drowning his unhappiness in whiskey and bar fights. The scar on his cheekbone came from a knife fight in Abilene that he barely remembered through the alcoholic haze. The turning point had been waking up in that El Paso jail and realizing that if he kept on the path he was on, he would either die young or become exactly like his father. The judge's offer had been a lifeline he had not known he needed. Catherine, in turn, found herself sharing memories of her childhood in Kansas, of her mother, who had died giving birth to a stillborn baby when Catherine was 10, leaving Catherine and her father to navigate grief together. She talked about the years of nursing him through his final illness, of watching him fade a little more each day, of feeling simultaneously heartbroken and relieved when he finally passed, because at least his suffering was over. She even found herself talking about Marcus, not with the burning shame she had felt before, but with growing anger at how thoroughly she had been deceived. "I think what makes me angriest is not just what he did, but that he made me doubt my own judgment," she said one evening as they sat on the porch of the main house after supper. Her aunt and uncle had already retired, trusting Silas's presence as appropriate supervision. "I pride myself on being intelligent and observant, but I saw only what I wanted to see with him. I ignored signs that should have warned me something was wrong. He was a professional liar," Silas pointed out. "Con artists are skilled at showing people exactly what they want to see. That is how they make their living. You are not foolish for believing someone who worked very hard to be believable. But other people would not have been so easily deceived. Stronger women, wiser women, would have protected themselves better." "Catherine." He waited until she looked at him. "You were exhausted from 2 years of watching your father die. You were grieving and lonely and vulnerable, and this man used all of that against you deliberately. Stop blaming yourself for his choices." She wanted to believe him. Some days she almost did. But the fear was still there, constant and gnawing. It had been 2 months now since Denver, and while she still was not certain, the evidence was mounting. Her dresses were definitely tighter. The morning nausea had not abated with the cooler weather that came in September. She was constantly tired, needing to rest in the afternoon, even though her work was not particularly strenuous. She had not told anyone, not even Silas, but she knew. In her bones, in her blood, in the subtle changes in her body that she could no longer attribute to stress or climate, she knew. The knowledge terrified her. Her aunt and uncle would be horrified. They would send her away, and she would have nowhere to go. She would end up in some home for unwed mothers if she was lucky, on the streets if she was not. The baby would be taken from her and given to strangers, or she would be forced to raise it alone with no means of support. Every possible future looked bleak. She was sitting in the garden one late September afternoon, supposedly weeding, but actually just staring at nothing, while panic circled in her mind when Silas found her. He took one look at her face and immediately knelt beside her, What is wrong? Are you ill? Catherine shook her head mutely, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Catherine, talk to me. Whatever it is, we will figure it out. There is nothing to figure out, she said, her voice flat and hopeless. I was a fool, and now I will pay the price for the rest of my life. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You are certain? As certain as I can be without a doctor, and I certainly cannot see a doctor without everyone knowing. The words came out bitter and harsh. I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was just stress and grief and the changing climate. But it has been 2 months, Silas. My body is changing. I can feel it. He sat back on his heels, processing this. All right. Then we adjust our plans. What plans? There are no plans. There is only ruin and scandal and shame. No, he said firmly. There is not. There is a solution if you are willing to consider it. What possible solution could there be? Silas took a deep breath. Marry me. Catherine stared at him, certain she had misheard. What? Marry me? We will tell your aunt and uncle that we have been courting quietly and have decided to make it official. Women marry quickly on the frontier all the time. No one will question it. And when the baby comes a little early, people might gossip, but they will not know for certain, and it will not matter because the child will have a name and a father. You cannot be serious. You do not love me. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are kind and brave and stronger than you believe. I know you deserve better than what happened to you. I know that baby deserves a chance at a decent life. He reached out and took her hand carefully, as though she might bolt like one of his wild horses. And I know that I have come to care about what happens to you, Catherine. These past weeks talking with you, getting to know you, it has been the best part of my days. I am not declaring undying passion, but I am offering you a real solution, a partnership, a future that does not involve shame and scandal. But what do you get from this arrangement? Why would you tie yourself to someone else's problem? Because it does not feel like a problem to me. It feels like an opportunity to do something right, to help someone who matters to me. And because I am tired of being alone, Catherine, I am 28 years old, and I have spent most of my life isolated and angry. The idea of building something with someone, of having a family even if it comes about in an unusual way, that does not sound like a sacrifice. It sounds like a gift. Catherine felt tears streaming down her face, but they were different from the tears she had cried before. These were tears of stunned relief, of disbelieving hope. You would really do this? Claim another man's child as your own? I would be that child's father in every way that matters, Silas said simply. And if you are willing, I would be your husband. It would not be a typical marriage, not at first. I would not expect anything from you that you were not ready to give. We could have separate rooms if you preferred, but we would face the world as partners, and we would protect this baby together. What do you say? She looked at him through her tears, at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. He was not perfect. He was rough-edged and scarred, with a past as troubled as her own. But he was kind and patient and honest, and he was offering her salvation when she had believed none existed. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. Relief washed over Silas's face, and he smiled, a genuine smile of pure happiness that transformed him. Then I suppose I should talk to your uncle about permission, and we should probably act like a courting couple for at least a few days before I propose officially, just to make it believable. How do we make it believable? We spend time together openly instead of finding excuses to cross paths accidentally. I call on you properly in the evenings. Maybe I take you for a ride and show you some of the prettier parts of the ranch. Your aunt and uncle notice us together and come to the obvious conclusion. He squeezed her hand gently. People believe what they expect to believe, Catherine. Your aunt has already made comments to me about you needing something to help you heal from your grief. If she sees us growing close, she will think it is romantic and wonderful, not suspicious. It was astonishing how quickly it all fell into place once they had committed to the plan. That evening, Silas asked formally if he might escort Catherine on a ride the following day to show her the upper pastures where the cattle were grazing. Margaret looked delighted. Walter appeared thoughtfully approving. Over the next week, Silas called on Catherine every evening after supper, and they sat on the porch talking while her aunt and uncle observed with increasing satisfaction from inside. On their rides, away from the house, they discussed practicalities. They would marry as quickly as possible. Silas had some money saved, enough to build a small house on the ranch property where they could live independently. They would tell everyone the baby came early, and anyone who bothered to count months on their fingers would keep such calculations to themselves or risk appearing uncharitable. Silas would continue working as foreman, and Catherine would manage their household. When the baby was old enough, they would decide together how to handle questions about parentage, though Silas was adamant that, as far as the world was concerned, he was the father in every meaningful sense. "What if you meet someone later?" Catherine asked as they sat their horses overlooking a valley dotted with grazing cattle. "Someone you actually love romantically? You would be trapped in a marriage to me." "Then I suppose I will have to find a way to be content," Silas said. "But Catherine, I meant what I said. I am choosing this. I am choosing you and this baby. If love grows from that choice, that would be a blessing. If we build a strong partnership based on respect and friendship, that is more than many marriages have. Either way, I will not regret my decision." "I think I could fall in love with you," Catherine said quietly, surprising herself with the admission. "You are nothing like Marcus. You are honest and kind, and you see me as a person, not as something to be used. That means more to me than I can express." "Then maybe we will both get lucky," Silas said, meeting her eyes. "Maybe this arrangement we are entering into for practical reasons will turn into something more. I am certainly willing to try." 10 days after he had proposed in the garden, Silas formally asked Walter Morgan for permission to marry Catherine. He presented the situation as a whirlwind romance, which was not entirely false, and emphasized his stable employment and prospects. Walter, who valued hard work and capability above romantic notions, gave his blessing readily. Margaret was overjoyed, tearfully declaring that she had suspected there was an attraction from the beginning, and was thrilled to see Catherine finding happiness after so much loss. They were married 3 weeks later in early October, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Tombstone. Catherine wore a blue dress that Margaret helped her make, letting out the waist more than necessary, and attributing it to Catherine finally gaining back weight after the grief-induced loss of appetite following her father's death. The minister, an elderly man who had seen enough of frontier life to be unsurprised by quick courtships, performed the ceremony efficiently. Miguel and his wife served as witnesses, along with Margaret and Walter. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and told Silas he could kiss his bride, Catherine felt her heart racing. It was their first kiss, and they had an audience, and she had no idea how to do this convincingly. But Silas simply cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her softly, a brief, tender press of lips that felt like a promise and a question all at once. When he pulled back, his gray eyes searched hers. "All right," he murmured, too quietly for anyone else to hear. She nodded, not trusting her voice. More than all right. That kiss, chaste as it was, had felt like more genuine affection than anything Marcus had ever given her. They moved into a small cabin on the ranch property that had previously been used for storage. Over the course of 2 weeks, with help from some of the ranch hands, Silas transformed it into a home. He built a partition dividing the single room into 2 spaces, a bedroom and a living area with a small kitchen. He constructed a proper bed frame and a table with chairs. Margaret contributed linens and dishes and curtains. By the time Catherine and Silas spent their first night there as a married couple, it felt cozy and welcoming despite its small size. True to his word, Silas gave Catherine the bedroom and made himself a sleeping space in the main room. "Until you decide otherwise," he said simply. "There is no rush. We have time to figure this out." The first weeks of marriage were strange and surprisingly comfortable. They fell into routines easily. Silas rose before dawn and went to work on the ranch while Catherine prepared breakfast. In the evenings, they ate supper together and talked about their days. On Sundays, they attended church in Tombstone and then spent the afternoon working on the house together, adding small improvements and comforts. Catherine found that living with Silas was nothing like she had imagined marriage would be based on her brief experience with Marcus. Silas was respectful of her space, never pushing or demanding anything she was not ready to give. He was surprisingly neat and helpful with household tasks, washing dishes without being asked and keeping his boots by the door so he did not track dirt through the house. He had a quiet sense of humor that emerged gradually as she got to know him better, and he could make her laugh with dry observations about the ranch hands or imitations of Walter's gruff manner. As Catherine's pregnancy progressed, Silas became increasingly protective without being overbearing. He insisted she rest in the afternoons. He brought her ginger tea in the mornings when the nausea was particularly bad. He accompanied her on walks in the evening when the heat had dissipated and let her set the pace without complaint. When her dresses became impossible to hide her condition, he took her into Tombstone to see a dressmaker who created loose, comfortable garments that accommodated her changing body. The announcement that a baby was on the way came in early November, carefully timed so that the birth in late March would seem merely early rather than impossibly premature. Margaret was thrilled, convinced that Catherine's quick recovery from grief and recent happiness were signs of robust health that naturally led to swift conception. Walter gave Silas a raise and a bonus, pleased at the prospect of having family continuing on the ranch. As winter settled over the Arizona desert, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain, Catherine found herself falling into what felt remarkably like love. It was different from the intense infatuation she had felt with Marcus. This was slower, quieter, built on a foundation of daily kindness and shared experience. She loved the way Silas listened when she talked, truly listened, as though her thoughts and opinions mattered. She loved his patience with the horses and the gentle way he interacted with Miguel's children when they came around the corrals. She loved his hands, rough and calloused, but always gentle when they touched her, helping her over rough ground, or steadying her when she stood up too quickly and felt dizzy. One evening in December, as they sat by the small fireplace Silas had built, Catherine worked on knitting a blanket for the baby, while Silas repaired a bridle. The domestic peace of the moment felt precious and fragile. "Silas," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever regret this, taking on me and this baby? Tying yourself to a situation that was not of your making?" He set down the bridle and looked at her seriously. "Not even for a moment. Catherine, these past few months have been the happiest of my life. Coming home to you every evening, building this life together, looking forward to this baby's arrival. It is everything I did not know I wanted. Do you regret it?" "No," she said firmly. "I was just wondering if you felt trapped. You have given me so much, and I do not know what I have given you in return, except complications." "You have given me a home," Silas said simply. "A real home, not just a place to sleep. You have given me someone to care about, and to care about me. You have given me purpose beyond just getting through each day. That is more than I ever expected to have." "I think I love you," Catherine said, the words spilling out before she could second-guess them. "I know that was not part of our agreement, and I am not asking for anything in return, but I wanted you to know. These feelings, they are real and they are growing, and I cannot pretend otherwise." Silas crossed the small space between them and knelt beside her chair. "Catherine, I love you too. I think I started falling in love with you that first night in the garden, when you cried on my handkerchief and then apologized for being human. Every day since has only made it stronger. I did not want to push or make you feel obligated to return feelings you might not have, but I have been in love with you for weeks now." She reached out and touched his face, tracing the scar on his cheekbone with gentle fingers. "I am still afraid sometimes, afraid that I will wake up and discover this has all been a dream, afraid that my past will somehow poison our future, afraid that I am not enough for you. You are more than enough, and your past is just that. Past. It does not define you." He turned his head and kissed her palm. "We get to write our future together, Catherine, whatever we want it to be." "Then I want it to be a real marriage," she whispered. "In every sense. I want to be your wife completely." "Are you certain? I do not want you to feel pressured." "I am certain. I trust you, Silas. I love you, and I want to be close to you, to have that connection that we have been building in every other way." He searched her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then, let me do this properly." He stood and offered her his hand. "May I join you in the bedroom tonight, Catherine? Not as a matter of husbandly rights, but as your partner who loves you and wants to show you what intimacy should be when it is freely given between people who care for each other." She took his hand, her heart racing, but not with fear, with anticipation, with trust. "Yes." That night, in the small bedroom with moonlight streaming through the window, Silas showed Catherine that physical love could be tender and mutual and beautiful when it was based on respect and genuine affection. He was patient and careful, asking permission with each new touch, paying attention to her responses, making sure she felt safe and valued. When she cried afterward, he held her close and let her process the complicated emotions. "I did not know it could be like that," she whispered against his chest. "Marcus never. It was never." "I know," Silas murmured, stroking her hair. "That was not your fault. He did not value you the way he should have. But I do, Catherine. I promise I do." From that night forward, their marriage became real in every sense. They shared the bedroom, their lives fully intertwined now. Catherine blossomed in the security of Silas's love, and he became more open and demonstrative in his affection. They moved through the winter months in a state of contentment that Catherine had never imagined possible during those dark weeks after leaving Denver. The baby came on a warm evening in late March, earlier than Catherine had told everyone to expect, but not impossibly so. Margaret served as midwife, with experience from helping women on neighboring ranches and in Tombstone. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Catherine was certain she could not endure another minute. But Silas stayed with her throughout, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, telling her she was strong and brave and that she could do this. When the baby finally emerged with a lusty cry, Margaret announced it was a healthy boy. She cleaned him quickly and placed him in Catherine's arms, and Catherine looked down at the tiny red face and felt a wave of love so powerful it took her breath away. "He is perfect," she whispered. Silas leaned over them both, his face reflecting wonder and something like awe. "He is. What should we call him?" They had discussed names, but never settled on anything definitive. Looking at the baby now, Catherine knew exactly what felt right. "James, after my father, James Garrett, if that is acceptable to you." "James Garrett," Silas repeated, reaching out to let the baby's tiny hand wrap around his finger. "Welcome to the world, son." The word son made Catherine's throat tighten. She looked at Silas, this man who had saved her when she had thought herself beyond saving, who had claimed another man's child without hesitation or resentment, who had turned an arrangement of convenience into a love story. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for him, for us, for giving me back my life." "You did that yourself," Silas said softly. "I just gave you a safe place to heal. The rest was all you." In the days following James's birth, Catherine experienced moments of profound gratitude mixed with lingering shadows of complicated feelings. She loved her son fiercely, but sometimes when she looked at him, she saw echoes of Marcus in the shape of his features, and it filled her with conflicting emotions. Silas, perceptive as always, noticed her occasional troubled expressions. "Talk to me," he said one afternoon as they sat together, watching James sleep in the cradle Silas had built. "I love him so much it terrifies me," Catherine admitted. "But sometimes I look at him and I think about his real father, about the lies and the betrayal, and I feel this confusing mix of anger and guilt. What if James grows up to be like Marcus? What if there is something fundamentally wrong with him because of where he came from?" "Catherine, listen to me." Silas took her hands in his. "James's character will be shaped by how he is raised, by the love we give him and the values we teach him. He is not Marcus Thornton's son in any meaningful sense. Marcus contributed nothing but biological material. James is our son, yours and mine. We will teach him to be honest and kind and respectful. We will show him what love actually looks like. That is what will define who he becomes." "You really believe that?" "I know it. I could have become my father, mean and cruel and isolated. But I had people who showed me a different way, who convinced me I could make different choices. We will do the same for James. And if you see Marcus when you look at him, then look deeper. See yourself, your strength and resilience. See me and the choice I made to be his father. See all the love that surrounds him. That is what matters." Catherine leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "How did I ever survive without you?" "The same way I survived before you, stubbornly and not very happily. But we do not have to do that anymore. We have each other now." As James grew from an infant into a curious, active baby, the little cabin rang with laughter and life. Catherine had never imagined herself as a mother, but she discovered she loved it, even the difficult parts. Silas was a devoted father, coming home from long days on the ranch and immediately reaching for the baby, playing with him and talking to him as though James could understand every word. The ranch thrived under Silas's continued management. Walter increased the herd and gave Silas more responsibility and profit sharing in the operation. Silas, in turn, suggested building a small house on a piece of ranch property where he and Catherine could have more space as their family grew. Walter agreed readily, pleased at the idea of keeping his foreman and niece close. They broke ground on the new house that summer, and by autumn of 1882, they moved into a snug two-bedroom home with a proper kitchen and a porch that looked out over the desert. James was 6 months old, pulling himself up on furniture and starting to babble. Catherine planted another garden, and Silas built a small stable for their personal horses. It felt like permanence, like they were putting down roots and building something lasting. One evening in October, on their first wedding anniversary, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, while James played with wooden blocks Silas had carved. Catherine leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling utterly content. "Do you remember what you said to me that night in the garden?" she asked quietly. "About burdens and finding someone who speaks your language?" "I remember. You became fluent in mine so quickly. You understood what I needed before I even knew how to ask for it. That is a rare gift, Silas." He kissed the top of her head. "You made it easy because you were willing to let me in. That takes courage, Catherine. You had every reason to keep your walls up, to protect yourself from being hurt again. But you chose trust anyway. That is your rare gift." "I want to have another baby," Catherine said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. "A child that is ours from the beginning, conceived in love. Is that selfish of me? Does it seem like I am trying to replace James, or value him less? Not even a little. James will always be our firstborn, and he will always be my son. But adding to our family, creating a sibling for him, that sounds perfect." Silas turned her face toward his and kissed her gently. "Let us make this family as big and loving as we possibly can." Over the next several years, they did exactly that. A daughter, Emma, was born in the summer of 1883, with Catherine's dark hair and Silas's gray eyes. Another son, Henry, arrived in early 1885, loud and demanding from his first breath. The house expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Silas adding rooms as needed. The ranch continued to prosper, and Silas became a full partner in the operation when Walter decided to reduce his active involvement as he aged. Catherine threw herself into community life, helping Margaret with charitable work in Tombstone and becoming known for her kindness to struggling families. She never forgot what it felt like to be desperate and ashamed, and she made it her mission to ensure that other women in difficult circumstances found support rather than judgment. More than once, she quietly helped young women who found themselves in situations similar to what hers had been, offering practical assistance and connecting them with resources. Silas became one of the most respected ranchers in the territory. His skill with horses became locally legendary, and people came from miles around, seeking his help with difficult animals. He remained humble and hardworking, never forgetting the angry young man he had once been, or the second chance that had changed his life's trajectory. He taught his sons to ride and his daughter to be fearless, and all three children grew up knowing they were deeply loved. James, their eldest, grew into a thoughtful, gentle-natured boy who loved books and animals in equal measure. When he was 7, old enough to start asking questions about family history, Catherine and Silas sat him down and told him a carefully edited version of the truth. They explained that sometimes families are created in unexpected ways, and that what matters is not biology, but love and choice. James listened solemnly, then asked if Silas was really his father. "In every way that counts," Silas said firmly. "I chose you, James. Before you were even born, I chose to be your father. That is never going to change." "Then I choose you too," James said simply, and that was the end of the discussion. He never asked about Marcus Thornton, and Catherine was grateful. That chapter of her life felt like it had happened to a different person in a different lifetime. In 1889, Arizona was moving towards statehood, and the wild frontier quality of the territory was gradually giving way to more settled civilization. Tombstone had survived the decline of the silver mines and reinvented itself. The ranch that Walter had built and Silas had expanded now employed 24 hands and ran over 2,000 head of cattle. The small cabin where Catherine and Silas had started their marriage had been converted into housing for the ranch foreman, who had replaced Silas when he became a partner, and the house they lived in now had 6 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a parlor with real furniture shipped from San Francisco. Catherine sometimes walked through her home and marveled at how far she had come from that broken, desperate girl sobbing in a garden. She was 30 years old now, the mother of 3 thriving children, the wife of a man she loved more with each passing year. She was respected in the community, financially secure, surrounded by family and friends. The shame that had once consumed her was a distant memory, replaced by confidence and purpose. One evening, after putting the children to bed, Catherine found Silas on the porch where they had spent so many important moments of their lives together. She sat beside him, and he automatically put his arm around her, pulling her close. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just counting my blessings. I have a habit of doing that when everything is quiet and peaceful." He smiled at her. "I count you first, always, then the children, then this place we have built together. I am a lucky man, Catherine Garrett. I am the lucky one. You saved my life, Silas, in every way that a person can be saved." "No," he said gently, turning to face her fully. "You saved yourself. I just held the door open while you walked through it. Everything after that, all the courage and strength and determination to build this life, that was you." Catherine thought about the woman she had been, the woman who had sobbed into her hands and believed she was irrevocably ruined. She thought about the cowboy who had held her close and told her she was pure to him, who had looked past shame and scandal to see her essential worth. She thought about the moment in the garden when he had offered marriage and she had accepted, trusting him even though she had every reason not to trust any man ever again. "Do you remember what I said that night in the garden?" she asked. "When I told you I was not pure anymore? I remember. I understand now what you meant when you said I was pure to you. You were telling me that my value as a person was not determined by what someone else had taken. You were telling me that I got to define myself, not Marcus, not society, not anyone else's judgment. You gave me permission to start over, to be more than my worst moment. You always were more than that moment. I just helped you see it." "I want to make sure our children understand that," Catherine said, "especially Emma as she grows up. I want her to know that her worth is inherent, not dependent on other people's opinions or actions. I want her to have the confidence I lacked when I was young. We will teach her. We will teach all of them." Silas squeezed her shoulder. "They are growing up surrounded by love and security. They will have advantages we never did." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The desert night air was cool and sweet, and from somewhere in the distance came the sound of coyotes singing. Catherine thought about the future, about their children growing up and starting families of their own, about growing old with this man who had proven that love could heal even the deepest wounds. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if we had not met?" she asked. "Sometimes I probably would have stayed alone, drifting from job to job, never putting down roots. I might have backslid into my old ways eventually. Meeting you changed my entire trajectory." He paused, then added thoughtfully, "What about you? What do you think would have happened?" Catherine considered the question seriously. "I honestly do not know if I would have survived. Not physically, perhaps, but in terms of spirit. I was so broken when I arrived here, so full of shame and fear. Without your intervention, I think I might have been destroyed by it. You did not just give me a way out of a difficult situation. You gave me back my sense of self-worth. That is an immeasurable gift." "Then I suppose we saved each other," Silas said. "I needed someone to care about as much as you needed someone to care about you. We were the right people at the right time." As the years continued to pass, Catherine and Silas watched their children grow and their ranch prosper. James developed a passion for veterinary medicine and eventually went east to Philadelphia to study, returning to Arizona to practice in Tombstone. Emma inherited her mother's compassion and her father's way with horses, and she shocked the community by insisting on learning the ranch business rather than pursuing more traditional feminine accomplishments. Henry turned out to have a gift for mathematics and went into the business side of ranching, helping expand the family's holdings. In 1895, when Catherine was 36 and Silas was 42, they welcomed an unexpected 4th child, a daughter they named Sarah. The older children doted on their baby sister, and Catherine found that mothering a child in her late 30s, with the security and confidence she had built over the years, was an entirely different experience than the nervous uncertainty of her first pregnancy. Walter Morgan passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1897, leaving the ranch entirely to Silas and Catherine in recognition of the work they had put into making it successful. Margaret stayed on, living in the main house and helping with the grandchildren, content in her old age to be surrounded by the family that had grown from the scared young woman who had arrived from Kansas so many years ago. On a warm evening in October 1901, Catherine and Silas celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together family, friends, and the entire community they had become integral parts of. Looking around at the gathered crowd, at their 4 children ranging from 18-year-old James, now a practicing veterinarian, to 6-year-old Sarah, at the ranch hands who had become like extended family, at the neighbors who had watched their family grow, Catherine felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Later, when the guests had departed and the children were in bed, Catherine and Silas returned to their porch, to the place where they had spent countless evenings over the past 2 decades. 20 years, Catherine said wonderingly. It seems impossible that it has been that long, and also like we have always been together. Best 20 years of my life, Silas said. He looked older now, with silver threading through his dark hair and deeper lines around his eyes. But to Catherine, he was as handsome as the day they met. I would not change a single moment. Not even the difficult parts, the moments of doubt and struggle. Especially not those. The difficult parts are what made us strong enough to appreciate the good parts. He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, as she had done thousands of times before. I have never regretted choosing you, Catherine, not for 1 second of one day in all these years. I love you, she said simply, more than I knew it was possible to love another person. You took a broken woman and helped her become whole. You took a shameful secret and transformed it into a beautiful family. You looked at me when I was at my absolute worst and told me I was pure in your eyes, and that changed everything. You were always pure, Silas said. You just needed someone to help you see it. And honestly, Catherine, you did the same for me. I was so lost before you, adrift and purposeless, going through the motions of living without really being alive. You gave me something to live for, someone to be better for. We healed each other. They sat in the peaceful darkness, surrounded by the life they had built together from the ashes of their individual traumas. Catherine thought about the scared girl who had arrived in Arizona 20 years ago, convinced her life was over, certain she was beyond redemption. That girl could never have imagined this future, this love, this profound sense of belonging and peace. I am grateful for everything, Catherine whispered, even the painful parts that brought me here. Because if I had not gone through what I did, if Marcus had not broken my heart and destroyed my trust, I might never have ended up in Arizona. I might never have met you. I would have had an entirely different life, possibly a safer and easier one, but not this one, not this perfect, beautiful, hard-won life. No path is wasted if it leads you home, Silas said. And you are my home, Catherine. You and our children in this land we have built on together. That is what home means to me now. As they sat together under the vast Arizona sky, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about the concept of purity and how she had internalized society's judgment, that her single mistake had permanently stained her. She thought about how Silas had rejected that judgment completely, insisting that her essential self was untouched by external circumstances or other people's actions. He had given her permission to forgive herself, to see herself through eyes of compassion rather than condemnation. That gift, more than the practical salvation of marriage or the security he had provided, was what had truly saved her. Silas had taught her that she was not defined by what happened to her, but by how she chose to respond. He had shown her that redemption was always possible, that second chances were real, that love could heal even the deepest wounds. The years continued to pass, measured in seasons and harvests, in children growing and grandchildren being born. James married a schoolteacher from Tombstone and gave Catherine and Silas their first grandchild, a boy named Walter, after his great-grandfather. Emma married a neighboring rancher's son, a young man who respected her intelligence and valued her partnership in running their combined properties. Henry went to university in California but returned to Arizona, unable to stay away from the desert that had shaped him. In 1910, when Arizona was on the verge of achieving statehood, Catherine and Silas found themselves grandparents 5 times over. They were in their 50s now, beginning to slow down physically, but still active in ranch management and community life. Their home was always full of visiting children and grandchildren, the rooms ringing with laughter and activity. One afternoon, Emma brought her youngest daughter to visit, and the little girl was fussy and tearful over some childish hurt. Catherine gathered her granddaughter onto her lap and soothed her with gentle words and soft touches, and as she did so, she caught Silas watching her with an expression of such profound love and contentment that it took her breath away. Later, when Emma had taken the children home and the house was quiet, Catherine asked him about that look. "I was just thinking about how lucky those grandchildren are to have you," Silas said. "They are growing up with a grandmother who understands hurt and healing, who knows how to comfort wounds both visible and invisible. All the pain you went through made you into someone who can offer real compassion, not just platitudes. That is a gift you are passing on to the next generation." "I never thought about it that way," Catherine admitted. "I always saw my past as something to be overcome, not as something that could be valuable. Every experience shapes us, the painful ones as much as the joyful ones. You could have let what happened to you make you bitter or closed off. Instead, you used it to develop empathy and understanding. That is a choice you made, Catherine, and it is something to be proud of." As Catherine entered her 60s, she began writing down her story, not for publication, but as a record for her children and grandchildren, so they would understand where she had come from and how she had built the life they had inherited. She wrote about Kansas and her father's death, about Marcus Thornton and the betrayal in Denver, about arriving in Arizona believing she was ruined. She wrote about Silas and the garden conversation that had changed everything, about the marriage proposal that had saved her, about the slow building of trust and love. She wrote about the fear surrounding James's birth and the complicated feelings she had struggled with regarding his parentage. She wrote about the decision to tell James the truth when he was old enough to understand, and his simple acceptance of the family he had always known. She wrote about the joy of watching her children grow into good people, about the pride she felt in their accomplishments and characters. Most importantly, she wrote about redemption and second chances. She wrote about how one person's kindness and refusal to judge could change the trajectory of another person's entire life. She wrote about the transformative power of being seen and valued for who you truly are, not for your mistakes or circumstances. She wrote about learning that purity was not something that could be taken by another person's actions, but was inherent in the soul and could never be truly lost. When she finished the manuscript, she gave it to Silas to read. He sat on their porch, now weathered by 30 years of desert sun, and read her words with tears streaming down his face. When he finished, he pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. "This is beautiful," he whispered. "This is the truth of us, of everything we have built and overcome. Our grandchildren will read this and understand that no mistake is permanent, that kindness matters, that love can heal anything." "That was what I hoped," Catherine said. "I want them to know that I was not always the confident woman they know now. I was broken once, and someone helped put me back together. If any of them ever face something that makes them feel irreparably damaged, I want them to remember our story and know that healing is possible." In 1912, Arizona finally achieved statehood, and Catherine and Silas attended the celebration in Phoenix with their entire extended family. They stood together, watching the American flag with 48 stars being raised for the first time, and marveled at how much had changed since Catherine had arrived in the Arizona Territory as a frightened young woman 31 years earlier. The ranch that had been their salvation and their livelihood now sprawled across thousands of acres and employed dozens of people. The children they had raised were successful and happy, contributing to their communities and raising families of their own. The love that had started as a practical arrangement had deepened into something profound and unshakable, surviving every challenge life had thrown at them. "We should be in the history books," Catherine joked as they drove back to the ranch after the statehood celebration. "Pioneers who helped build Arizona." "I am content with the life we have built being our legacy," Silas replied. "We do not need history books to validate what we know is true. We took two broken people and made them whole. We created a family from nothing. We turned desert into home. That is enough." As Catherine grew older, she spent more time with her grandchildren, telling them stories of the early days and teaching them the values she and Silas had worked so hard to instill in their own children. She was particularly close to Emma's daughter Ruth, a thoughtful girl who reminded Catherine of herself at that age. Ruth loved to sit with her grandmother and listen to stories of the old days, when Tombstone was wild and lawless and the desert seemed impossibly harsh. One day, when Ruth was 15, she asked Catherine about love and marriage and how to know when someone was trustworthy. Catherine took the question seriously, recognizing it as the moment to pass on wisdom earned through painful experience. The key, Catherine said carefully, is to notice how a person treats you when they have nothing to gain from kindness. Do they listen when you speak? Do they respect your boundaries? Do they keep their promises, even small ones? Do they try to control you, or do they encourage you to be yourself? Real love builds you up. It does not tear you down or make you doubt yourself. If someone makes you feel less than or ashamed, or like you need to hide parts of yourself, that is not love, no matter what they call it. How do you know all this? Ruth asked. Catherine smiled gently. I learned it from your grandfather. He showed me what real love looks like by being patient and kind and respectful. He never made me feel ashamed of my past or judge me for my mistakes. He saw me as I really was and loved me anyway. That is the standard you should hold anyone to who claims to love you. Did you love him right away? No, I trusted him first, and then I grew to love him. Sometimes that is the better order. Trust built on consistent kindness is a solid foundation. Infatuation that is not backed up by respect and genuine care is just fantasy. Catherine watched Ruth absorb this information, and she felt satisfied that she had passed on something valuable. The lessons she had learned through pain and Silas's gentle teaching were now being transmitted to the next generation. Perhaps Ruth would avoid some of the pitfalls Catherine had fallen into. Perhaps the story Catherine had written would serve as a guide and a warning and a source of hope for all her descendants. In 1920, Catherine and Silas celebrated their 39th wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them, and a simple dinner on their porch. They were in their 60s now, moving more slowly but still present and engaged with life. Their children were all married with children of their own. The ranch was thriving under James and Henry's management, with Emma contributing her expertise as well. 39 years, Silas mused. Just one more until we hit 40. That is a lifetime, Catherine. It has been the best lifetime I could have imagined, Catherine said. Better than anything I dreamed of when I was young and thought I knew what love should look like. What did you think it should look like? Something dramatic and romantic, I suppose. Grand gestures and passionate declarations. I did not understand that real love is found in the small moments, in someone bringing you tea when you are sick, or holding your hand during a thunderstorm, or building you a house with their own hands. I did not know love was supposed to be safe and steady and kind. That is because no one teaches that version, Silas said. Everyone focuses on the excitement and attraction, not the daily choice to show up and care for someone even when it is difficult. But the daily choice is what matters. That is what creates a life together. They sat in comfortable silence, and Catherine reflected on all the daily choices they had made over nearly 40 years. The choice to be patient with each other, the choice to communicate honestly, the choice to forgive small hurts and work through larger conflicts, the choice to keep choosing each other, day after day after day, until the choosing became as natural as breathing. I would marry you again, she said suddenly. If we could go back to that church in Tombstone in 1881, knowing everything I know now about what the next 40 years would hold, I would still say yes without hesitation. So would I, Silas said, reaching for her hand. Best decision I ever made, offering you that solution in the garden, though it stopped being about solving a problem and became about building a love pretty quickly. When did you know you were really in love with me? Not just fond of me or protective of me, but actually in love? Silas considered the question thoughtfully. There was a moment about 2 months after we married. I came home from a long day working on fence repairs, exhausted and filthy and sore. You had saved dinner for me, even though it was late, and you sat with me while I ate, just talking about your day. Nothing important or dramatic, just small things like how the garden was doing and what Margaret had said when you saw her, and I realized I was completely content, not just satisfied or comfortable, but genuinely happy in a way I had never been before. That was when I knew it was love. For me, it was watching you with James, Catherine admitted. He was maybe 3 months old, and he was fussy and would not settle. You walked with him for over an hour, just pacing and humming and being patient, until he finally fell asleep on your shoulder. The tenderness on your face, the way you looked at him like he was the most precious thing in the world. Even though he was not your biological child, that was when I knew I loved you completely. They reminisced about other moments, the birth of Emma, the time Henry broke his arm falling out of a tree, and they both panicked but held it together for his sake. The year drought threatened the ranch, and they worked together to find solutions. The countless evenings on this porch watching sunsets and counting stars. As 1921 dawned, Catherine began to feel her age catching up with her. She tired more easily and sometimes found herself short of breath. Silas worried, but Catherine refused to let it slow her down too much. There was too much life to live, too many grandchildren to spoil, too many sunsets to watch from her beloved porch. In the spring of 1921, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a large party attended by the entire extended family and half of Tombstone. Catherine looked around at the gathering and marveled at the network of love that had grown from that desperate moment in the garden 4 decades earlier. Over a dozen grandchildren, ranging from toddlers to young adults, 3 successful children who were raising families of their own, friends and neighbors who had become like family, all of it built on a foundation of one man's kindness and one woman's courage to accept help. During the party, James stood and proposed a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the crowd. "They taught me that family is not just about blood, but about choice and commitment. They showed me that love can heal anything, that redemption is always possible, that second chances are real. They built something beautiful from very difficult beginnings, and I am grateful every day to be part of their legacy." Catherine found herself crying, and Silas pulled her close, his own eyes damp. Around them, their children and grandchildren and friends raised glasses and cheered, celebrating not just 40 years of marriage, but 40 years of love and persistence and daily choices to honor the commitment they had made. That night, after everyone had gone home and they were alone on the porch under the stars, Catherine told Silas something she had been thinking about for weeks. "I am not afraid of dying anymore," she said quietly. "I used to be terrified of it, especially after my father passed. But now I feel like I have lived such a full life that whenever it ends, it will be enough. I have loved and been loved. I have raised children and seen them thrive. I have built something meaningful. I have healed from wounds I thought would kill me. Whatever comes next, I am at peace. Please do not leave me anytime soon," Silas said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am not ready to lose you, Catherine. I need more years. I need more sunsets on this porch, more conversations, more moments of watching you with our grandchildren. I am greedy for more time." "Then I will stay as long as I can," Catherine promised. "But when the time comes, you have to promise me something. Promise me you will not close yourself off, that you will let our children take care of you, that you will keep living, not just existing. Promise me you will remember all the good we built together and let it sustain you. Only if you promise me that you know how much you are loved, how much you have always been loved, from that first night in the garden until this very moment. Promise me you know that you transformed my life as much as I transformed yours." "I promise," Catherine said, and they held each other under the infinite Arizona sky, grateful for the time they had been given and the love they had built together. Catherine lived 3 more years, years filled with watching grandchildren grow and welcoming great-grandchildren. She held Ruth's baby boy in the summer of 1923 and told him stories about the desert and the ranch and the love that had made all of this possible. She worked in her garden until the very end, finding peace in the cycle of planting and growth and harvest. She sat on her porch with Silas every evening, counting stars and blessings and memories. She passed peacefully in her sleep in October of 1924, 2 weeks after her 65th birthday and 43 years after arriving in Arizona as a desperate, broken young woman. Silas found her in the morning, lying in their bed with a peaceful expression on her face, and though his heart shattered, he was grateful that she had gone gently, surrounded by love, until the very last moment. At her funeral, the church in Tombstone was packed with people whose lives Catherine had touched, women she had helped through difficult circumstances, children and grandchildren who adored her, neighbors who had benefited from her kindness, friends who had witnessed her transformation from wounded girl to confident matriarch. James delivered the eulogy, speaking of his mother's courage and capacity for love, of the legacy she left in the form of family and community, and accumulated wisdom. After the service, Silas stood at Catherine's grave with their children and grandchildren gathered around him. He thought about the woman she had been and the woman she had become. He thought about the moment in the garden when she had sobbed into her hands that she was not pure anymore and he had held her close and told her she was pure to him. That moment had defined both of their lives, setting them on a path neither could have imagined. "She saved me just as much as I saved her," Silas told his children as they stood in the cemetery. "I was lost before your mother came into my life. She gave me purpose and love and a reason to be better than I had been. She made me into the man and father I became. I will miss her every day for the rest of my life, but I will never regret a single moment we had together." Silas lived another 8 years, staying active on the ranch and deeply involved with his children and grandchildren. He never remarried, content with the memories of Catherine and the life they had built. He told their story often, wanting to make sure future generations understood the importance of kindness, of second chances, of looking past society's judgments to see a person's true worth. On quiet evenings, he sat on the porch they had shared for so many years, looking out at the desert sunset and talking to Catherine as though she were still beside him. He told her about the grandchildren's accomplishments, about the ranch's continued success, about the small moments of joy that still punctuated his days. He thanked her for the years they had together, for the love that had transformed him, for choosing to trust him when she had every reason not to trust anyone. When Silas passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1932, surrounded by family, his children found a letter he had written to be read after his death. In it, he recounted the story of meeting Catherine, of the garden conversation that had changed both their lives, of the 43 years of marriage that had followed. He wrote about the transformative power of seeing someone as they truly are rather than as society judges them to be. He wrote about the importance of extending grace and kindness, especially to those who feel beyond redemption. The letter ended with instructions that his manuscript and Catherine's memoir be preserved and shared with future generations of the family, so that their story would not be forgotten. He wanted his descendants to know that their family had been built on a foundation of compassion and second chances, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that no one was ever too broken to be made whole again. James, following his father's wishes, compiled both manuscripts into a single volume that became a treasured family heirloom. Each generation read the story of how Catherine and Silas found each other, how they built a life and a family from circumstances that should have destroyed them, how one moment of kindness in a desert garden had rippled forward through decades and generations. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the years, a testament to what Catherine and Silas had built together. The house they lived in was preserved, and the porch where they had spent countless evenings became a sort of shrine to their love story. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren sat on that porch and heard the story of the cowboy and the ruined girl who found redemption in each other's arms. The small grave in the Tombstone cemetery where Catherine and Silas were buried side by side became a place family members visited when they needed perspective or comfort. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and dates and a single inscription chosen by their children. They chose love, and love made them whole. The story of Catherine and Silas became more than just family history. It became a reminder that judgment and condemnation serve no useful purpose, that kindness costs nothing but can change everything, that second chances are not just possible, but necessary. It became a beacon for anyone who felt damaged or ruined or beyond saving, proof that one person's refusal to judge can open the door to transformation and healing. In the end, Catherine Morgan Garrett's greatest legacy was not the ranch or the family or the material success they achieved. It was the proof that purity is not something that can be taken or lost or judged by others. It is inherent in every person's essential self, untouchable by external circumstances. And when someone looks at you with eyes that see your true worth, when someone holds you close and tells you that you are pure to them, they are not denying reality or offering empty comfort. They are seeing clearly, perhaps for the first time, past the lies society tells about worth and value and redemption, to the truth of who you really are. That truth Catherine and Silas proved over 43 years of marriage and countless acts of daily love, is that we are all worthy of grace. We are all deserving of second chances. We all have the capacity to heal from wounds that seem fatal. We all can build something beautiful from the wreckage of our worst moments. All it takes is one person willing to extend kindness without judgment and another person brave enough to accept it. Their story, preserved in letters and memoirs and family memory, continued to be told for generations. A reminder that love can indeed heal anything, that no one is ever truly beyond redemption, and that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with a simple declaration, "You are pure to me."